the feedback.
Could I now invite the next presentation, which comes to us from Jill Darling. Jill, as I think we've all become familiar with through the course of this conference, is the Survey Director for the Understanding America study. And prior to joining CIPHER, she was Survey Director at the VA's Research and Development Center for Healthcare Innovation. And she's also spent the early part of her career doing polls and election-related research at the Los Angeles Times. And Jill is going to speak to us about COVID behavior and attitudes during the pandemic period. So Jill, please.
All right. Oops, do you see me on the screen here? All right. So thank you, Marco. That was very fascinating. I hadn't seen the results of that, and that was really interesting. So thank you for that. All right, I'm Jill Darling, the Survey Director for the Understanding America study. And I'm going to really kind of give an overview today of the work that we've done on collecting COVID-19 data over the course of the pandemic since we got our tracking survey started, and touch on some of what we and others have observed in the past year. All right, so I'd like to just acknowledge our survey team. We have a large group of people who got the survey up and running, contributed to doing that, and are major contributors to just keeping everything going and getting out all of the products that we produce that are based on the data we're collecting. And the tracking survey is part of the Understanding America study panel that Marco referred to. 10 minutes isn't much time here, so I'm going to just briefly describe the panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, of course. And I have also provided links throughout, and the slides are going to be available. So there's plenty of places to get more information if you're interested. But basically the overview is that we use an address-based sampling to get as close to nationally representative panel of adults as we can get. We provide tablets to those who don't have internet access so that they can participate. We do recruitment and surveys in English and Spanish. We have representative samples in California and LA County, as well as nationally, and we end up with about a 14% panel recruitment rate. So we launched our first COVID survey March 10th last year as a standalone survey. That means we're coming up on really a full year of data collection. And I believe we're the only continuous tracking poll that has collected data across continuously across that entire period of time. So starting in April, we invited panel members to join the tracking survey after we had completed the first full March survey. And those who consented were assigned to a specific day in a 2-week period. So for example, someone might log in every other Monday to fill out the survey questionnaire. In LA, we added an extra survey so that they were answering questions every week. And we built a set of online graphics that update daily at our COVID-19 Pulse website, where you can look at longitudinal data by demographic breakouts that are updated every day. And we create full weighted data sets and provide them to researchers and teams who register and provide a research proposal for what they're going to do. So as I said, we're coming up on a full year now of data collection. It seems reasonable to compile some overall descriptive statistics about participation over the year. So I'll do that before I get into some further things. So this graphic is just showing the sample size in each wave, which I have here mainly because it makes kind of a cool backdrop for the numbers. But about more than 6,900 panel members completed our first March survey, our standalone survey. And then all but 275 consented to continue in the tracking survey over time. You see that dip in the second wave because people were consenting, and as they were coming in over a 2-week period, it took a little while to ramp up. We have an average of about 6,200 per wave, which is a response rate of 75% on average. And just under half completed every wave after their first wave. That was 41% who did all of them from wave 1 all the way to the end. And 82% completed more than half of the waves to which they were invited, which averages out to monthly participation. We focused from the beginning on how to make the data accessible, how to disseminate findings to people who would be looking for information. Now, of course, there are a ton of good sources of data, COVID data, but in the beginning there were far fewer, and when we started, there were even fewer. So in addition to our graphics website, we created a dashboard in the panel pages to facilitate access to for researchers and press and the public. And over the past year, we have had more than 250 research teams apply to work with the data. And they've been putting out articles and working papers, more than 50 that we know of. If anybody has any that you've done that we don't have in our list yet, you should let us know. We put them in our list. We put out roughly one policy briefing and press release per month. And there were additional others, which provide a source of data for more than 450 media and trade journal stories. The last time that our communications folks ran that for us, that's what they found. And for every wave, we create data files, top lines, crosstabs, and an updated longitudinal file. Put that all online and make it available. All right, our survey has varied in length and number of questions from wave to wave, but there's a core set of about 18 minutes of questions covering a wide range of domains. We also had many research teams add questions of their own in one-off or limited series modules. I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically we have covered in all or almost all of our waves, awareness and knowledge and safety about COVID avoidance beliefs and behaviors, perceptions of risk, mental, physical, behavioral health, employment and earnings and work hours and wages, insecurity in food and money and housing, beliefs and behaviors regarding vaccines, and families with K-12 and post-secondary students, the impacts, as well as people experiencing stigma and discrimination. So I'm going to run quickly through a few major early findings that sometimes became themes of the later pandemic as well. I apologize for going fast, but all the graphics and the releases therefrom are available on our website. And also the slides are going to be available. So from the time of that first survey in March a year ago, we gained insight into really the immediate and dramatic impact of the closures and stay-at-home orders on what happened with jobs. Ari's going to be presenting on this topic in session 7 today in depth, so I'm not going to go through these findings or talk about them much other than just to note that we measured this really steep drop-off in employment nationwide, while the country's economic indicators were showing a much smaller decline. We also see here on this left graph that Los Angeles, that's there in red, had started off nearly the same level as employment as the country, just over 60%. It was even more severely hit with losses than the country was as a whole. We also saw right away that the pandemic was going to impact people in different ways, right? It killed service industry jobs in March and impacted those who tended to fill those jobs, including women and communities of color hardest, while white collar workers like me retained our jobs and we transitioned to safely working from home. These are themes that we see repeated throughout. In late April, Ana Saavedra's education project team released its first important findings, documenting the greater burden borne by working moms compared to dads when school went remote. And they had a lot of other important findings as well. The team conducted more surveys across summer and fall, releasing findings that helped shape the discourse around school reopenings in recent months. She has now a website with graphics showing the changes over time in multiple variables as well. In addition to Anna's work among parents of school-age kids, Hema Zamaro and her team have delved into how the pandemic has affected women and the gender differences in what has been happening in the world of work and family. And I'm happy to report that actually Hema is giving a presentation on this very topic in the next session today. So you're going to have an opportunity to hear from her about it. She has very striking findings from what her team has been doing. The next couple of graphs are a look at longitudinal behavior data, as I promised in the title of the talk. This is the blue line here are people who stayed home except for essential activities and exercise. The red line are people who visited each other in each other's homes or in their own homes. So you see here in early April, when we started asking these questions, 80% or nearly so were staying home, and just over about a third maybe were visiting with others. These lines cross over in late May when people headed into summer, feeling like maybe the worst was over. You see some slight changes in behavior around the holidays, but really America never really locked down again. These behaviors vary widely by region and race, white people are visiting each other way more than people of color, and rural people never really stopped. So maybe all these folks who were visiting others and going out and doing other things were wearing masks. The graph on the left shows that the mask wearing ramped up quickly and reached pretty much 9 out of 10 over the year. That's a great sign. But the chart on the right gives the percentage of time that masks were worn during activities ranging from grocery shopping, where masks were worn 90% of the time, to gathering in groups of 10 or more, visiting others' homes where masks were not worn about 79% of the time. Again, variation by demographic groups and location. And one final slide about likelihood of getting vaccinated. The blue here are people who've either been vaccinated or likely to get one. The red line are those who say they're unlikely to. The green are people who aren't sure. The blue line began to include those who've been vaccinated starting in January. So the red line, vaccine hesitancy, you can see that sort of growing until late fall, when it leveled off while the rate of vaccination or likelihood rose. And we're finding as time goes on that while there's persistent racial and ethnic differences in these self-described likelihood of getting a vaccine, the driving factor has now become educational attainment. Those without college degrees are significantly less likely to get a vaccine, and more often say they're unlikely to get vaccinated or say they aren't sure. So this has significant policy implications. All right, so I'm over a little bit, but I just want to say thank you to our sponsors and those who used their own grant money to add modules to the survey. If you'd like more information, you can follow these links or contact us. And at the end here, if you get the slides, there's more information on methodologies and links to where you can find more data.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jill. I'm going to just, if everyone can just take a moment to take a snapshot of this page so that you know how to contact individuals related to the tracking survey, that would be great. I think it's so exciting to see this work just because of the very many advantages that we have, the speed, the depth, the longitudinal nature of that data. And I think right now, as we go into this very complex period where everyone is experiencing in different states a different pandemic, I think having this longitudinal data and the diversity of teams working on it is going to be spectacularly important. So can I take questions? Can I take questions from the audience, please? Are there any questions?
How could they have questions? I went through it at about 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Well, could I then turn it back to you, Jill? What, and I think, you know, sort of the most recent finding that has come out of it, that really now education is trumping all of these other demographics. What in so far has been the result that you have found perhaps most surprising or most intriguing out of all of the data that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, everywhere we look, there's something interesting. Something that we're investigating right now is really trying to get at that idea of there being different pandemics and how can we get at that. And something that we have seen that we're about to start looking into a little bit more is when we're looking at, you know, there's been a lot of talk about fatigue, and I showed you that graph, you know, about how people are staying home or not staying home, visiting others, right? That blue graph of remaining in the residence except for essential activities or exercise, that blue line, that really has a great deal of difference in it. You can imagine that people who are older, people who are more concerned, actually the African-American community tend to have a higher percentage there. But what we're seeing when we look at like the difference between if someone was staying at home and then they aren't now, and we're sort of thinking of that as fatigue or like when did that set in, and we're looking at it over time, we're seeing that that also has a component of people who are in the highest income groups. And we're not quite sure about that. That's the first time we've seen that appear. But when we look at we've sort of made a variable called fatigue, and we're looking at what that might look like. And so we're just going to do some more analysis and see about what we see there. But this data, as you say, is so rich, and there's so much in it that pretty much everywhere you look, there's something fascinating to see.
I'm going to pick up on that topic of fatigue and sort of segue into a question that's come up here from Tracy Kearns, and sort of say that, you know, we have COVID fatigue and pandemic fatigue, but that might also translate into COVID survey fatigue. And so we might find that after a while, the same people are sort of getting not just exhausted of the pandemic, but about answering questions about the pandemic. So have you found any demographic differences or any other suggestive differences in attrition to the COVID panel?
I was looking at that the other day, and I do see that we have had a drop off in younger people. We had more in the early waves than we do now. I have actually some demographics in a later slide. Let me just go there. This shows from our latest wave, the unweighted versus weighted percentages. We put these tables in every one of our top line methodologies that we put out for every wave. I went back and looked at earlier ones to just compare what earlier ones might look like. And we did see, we had, I think about unweighted, it was about 19% in that lowest age category, and it's 16% now. And we've had a bit of a change. I mean, very actually incremental in most of the other ones, but that really was the one that stood out.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, and there's one last question from Wendy, which is, a very big question to end this. So if you could just summarize really quickly, just a little bit about the different teams that are working with the UAS and the things that are looking at, perhaps what you're most excited to see coming out in the next, 6 months or so.
Yes, well, I think that what we're looking at going forward is, looking at more about what's happening now as the pandemic is winding down. We're concentrating on vaccination, how that's going. And there's also a lot of interest in thinking about long haul COVID and how people are transitioning out of this. I mean, I think it's extremely important that, what we're seeing, and Hema's going to be talking about this later, the impact on women in particular, the economic impact on women has been disproportionately high, and on the people who are already in sort of a vulnerable state, lower income people. And watching what happens as this goes along and being able to provide data for policymakers to understand the impacts of the pandemic and things like long haul COVID, I think are going to be an important contribution.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the great things about the UAS is that it is one of the unique resources that addresses the fact that we don't have just a health pandemic, but we have an economic pandemic, a social pandemic, all of these things at the same time. And we have these competing risks within the economy, and very few data resources allow us to really study this in a meaningful way. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jill. I'm going